there's really kind of almost no such thing as provoking China. China provokes itself, really, is what's going on there.
Hello again, and welcome to Perspectives with Nilo. If this is your first time checking out our podcast, you might also enjoy some of our past episodes, which are all listed on our blog site at pwnilo.com. In this episode, I'm chatting with Courtney Donovan Smith, who is based in Taiwan. He's a regular contributing columnist for Taiwan News, as well as the Central Taiwan correspondent for ICRT FM radio, and a political analyst at the Taiwan Report. We have a lot to cover today, including the somewhat controversial visit of former Taiwanese President Ma Ying-jeou to China, an overview of the political landscape in Taiwan as the January 2024 presidential election approaches, recent forfeiting of diplomatic ties with Taiwan by Honduras, and President Tsai Ing-wen's US stopover and upcoming meeting with US House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. But first, for those of you new to Taiwan politics, a little background information may be helpful. Taiwan's political scene is divided into two major camps in terms of cross-strait relations. In other words, how Taiwan should relate to China, or the PRC. The Pan-Green coalition, which is mainly led by the Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, leans pro-independence. And the Pan-Blue coalition, mainly led by the Kuomintang, or KMT, leans pro-unification with China. Moderates in both camps regard the Republic of China as a sovereign independent state. But the Pan-Green coalition regard the Republic of China as synonymous with Taiwan, while moderates in the Pan-Blue coalition view it as synonymous with China. We've added links in our blog if you want to dive deeper. Recently, commentators have been remarking how ties between the KMT and the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, have been warming. And this week, we see what has been described as a path-breaking visit by former Taiwanese President Ma Ying-jeou to the People's Republic of China. I began by asking Courtney Donovan Smith about the significance of this visit and the background leading up to it.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. There's several layers to that question. Starting with the KMT and the CCP's relations recently warming up. Under the previous KMT chair, Johnny Jiang, he relations with the Chinese Communist Party cooled significantly under him, and because Johnny Jiang was a very light blue politician, he's not a deep blue politician, so he's more pro Taiwan and more pro U.S. than the strong unificationist wing of the party. And the KMT had just come off of the 2020 election where they lost in a landslide. And so there's a lot of reappraisal in some elements within the KMT about how to position themselves towards the public. So he started moving away from China. Now, when the current chair came in, Eric Zhu, last year he made some statements that were really quite remarkable. He talked about, he said that the KMT has always been anti-communist. He said that, that Taiwan has always been pro-US, the KMT has always been pro-US. He started down-talking the 1992 consensus by calling it a non-consensus consensus. So he was making a lot of very bold statements within the KMT. Now, what I think happened is that the elites in the party, I think, pushed back on him, because by a few months later, he had really toned it down, and he sent Andrew Xia, his deputy, during the Pelosi visit when China was conducting all these war games. Right immediately after that, Andrew Xia took a KMT delegation to China. And ever since that happened, Eric Zhu's references to China have changed. And he's been a lot more friendly. So now he talks about a double D strategy, which is deterrence, which means bolstering the military, and dialogue, by which he means with China. So whereas before he seemed to be really trying to cut off relations with China, he's kind of rolled that back. And so that's, I think, behind the scenes, I'm pretty sure he came under a lot of pressure. So, but recently, relations have been improving between the KMT and the CCP. He's been talking in a lot more friendly terms about the 1992 consensus, that sort of thing. Relations between the CCP and the KMT under Eric Zhu are still definitely not as warm as they were when Ma Ying-jeou, the former President Ma Ying-jeou, was the KMT chair. For example, previous KMT chairs who were much more on the pro-unification side of the party, people like Ma Ying-jeou, Lian Zhan, these former chairpersons, including Hong Xiu-ju, they would all go to China in their capacity as KMT chair. They would meet with Xi Jinping in many cases. But Eric Zhu has only been sending his deputy. And I think that's because he's very aware of the optics if he goes himself. So he's kind of trying to play it both ways here. He's trying to appease the pro-unification wing in his party, but he knows that if he gets too friendly with China, then the public won't trust him and the KMT with governing because people are concerned about China.
I see. And would Ma's visit be seen to be coordinated with Eric Zhu? I mean, is he coordinating as regards the trip with Eric Zhu, or is it just something he's doing independently?
Okay. What I think happened there is, frankly, I think that Eric Zhu would be much happier if Ma didn't go. Because the optics are not that good. But my strong suspicion here is that Ma Ying-jeou basically said, I'm going to China, and he's the former president and still has he's still a major heavyweight in the party, and Eric Zhu really wasn't in a strong position to say no. That's what I think is going on here.
Okay.
Now, but they did coordinate. They pretty clearly did coordinate. And Eric Zhu, I suspect that the reason why Ma says he's not going to meet with any. Now, this was listed on the KMT website, these details about Ma's trip, that he wouldn't conduct any political meetings. He would not go to Beijing. He would not meet Xi Jinping. So there was a list of those things. Now, I haven't had a chance to get to the news today, but I did scan and see that Ma has said some things that are not going to sound very good to mainstream voters in Taiwan.
Okay, maybe we'll come to those in a second, because I have seen some discussion on Twitter, but I did want to ask you, I believe he's leading a delegation of students and youth leaders. Who then, if he's not meeting any political figures, who is he expected to meet, and where is he visiting exactly?
Well, there's two major thrusts to this trip. I guess you could say three. One is he wants to go to his ancestors' grave for tomb sweeping, and go through the proper rituals at his ancestors' graves. So there's that personal element to the trip. If you look at his itinerary, it's almost all, I guess you could say, the greatest hits of the KMT when they were in China sites. Sun Yat-sen's mausoleum and, sites of battles and stuff like that. So he clearly wants to, these are 30, I believe it's 30 students affiliated with his Ma Ying-jeou Foundation. So they're going to be deep blue. And so he wants to take them on this tour of sort of, past glory sites of the KMT in China. He also wants the students to meet with academics and other students at some one or more universities in China. So there's academic exchange is another aspect of the trip.
Do you think this visit will do anything to relieve the current state of heightened tensions between the PRC and Taiwan?
Uh, well, it might in very small ways. On Andrew Xia's trip earlier this year, and that was his second delegation. After that trip, the Chinese side lifted some restrictions on imports of things like certain types of fish and agricultural products. Um, so that, in a sense, you could say that it did ever so slightly decrease tensions on that sense. But I do think that the CCP did that very intentionally to try and bolster the KMT, because the KMT now is campaigning on, peace with China and dialogue with China. And so I think that they wanted to sort of send a message to the people in Taiwan that, if you would elect a KMT government, things will be more peaceful and dialogue will reopen. After the Andrew Xia trip, he did a second delegation earlier this year. His meetings went as high as with Wang Huning. I believe he's ranked number 4 in the Chinese Communist Party. But there's been a lot of talk in the press that Xi Jinping has tasked Wang with coming up with some new formulations on China. Specifically, obviously the one country, two systems has been totally discredited with the Taiwan public. So to come up with some kind of new formulation, there's even the possibility, I don't know if this will happen or not, but there's also the possibility that they may be reconsidering the 1992 consensus as well. Because both of these concepts are deeply, 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 deeply unpopular in Taiwan. And, like 85, 90%, over 90%, sort of depending on the poll, of the public dislikes both of those concepts. So Wang is basically Xi Jinping's number 2 on Taiwan, and he's the one really kind of tasked with doing the political legwork to try and come up with some new formulation. That was initially reported by Nikkei, and I've seen some other outlets have also said similar things. So we'll see what comes out of it, because I can't see a formulation that would work any better than, because it's all going to be underpinned by, the one, what China calls the one China principle. So,
okay, yeah. And I see a Reuters news agency headline that quoted Ma as saying, "We are all Chinese." But as I mentioned earlier on Twitter, there was a quick rebuttal by many people responding that the majority of Taiwanese no longer identify as Chinese. I know there's presidential elections coming up and so on. Do you think these kind of comments will damage the KMT's chances in these upcoming elections?
Yes. Well, let's put it this way: it'll definitely damage the image of the party in the short term with a lot of people. But a lot of those people would never vote for KMT anyway. I mean, at this point, about 2/3 of the public identifies as Taiwanese only. About 1/3 as both Taiwanese and Chinese, and about 2%, around 2%, identifying as Chinese only. And one little detail about that Chinese only thing that almost nobody mentions, but I think is really quite important, is that there are over 500,000 spouses in Taiwan who've gotten citizenship, but they were actually born in China or Hong Kong. Plus, there's still a fair number of people, sort of Ma Ying-jeou's generation, who were actually born in China and fled to Taiwan in 1949. So if you do the math, the 2% that identifies solely as Chinese, probably the vast majority, if not almost all of them, are actually born in China, or maybe they're the next generation children of parents from China.
It does seem that the KMT are having some success recently. I saw that Chiang Wan-an, also known as Wen Chiang of the KMT, was elected the mayor of Taipei back in December. He being the son of former Vice Premier John Chiang, and also believed to be the great-grandson of former President of the Republic of China, Chiang Kai-shek. And in an article you wrote yourself for the Taiwan News entitled Curious Shifts in Taiwan's Political Landscape, I also see mention of the Taiwan People's Party, the TPP, and former Taipei Mayor Ko Wen-je also weighing in on the race for president. And of course, then you have the DPP, who are the incumbents as well. It seems like a rather complex situation, but can you give us a brief, high-level summary of how it's evolving at this point?
In the presidential race, you've got Ko Wen-je of the Taiwan People's Party. He's already long declared. We've known he's going to run for years now. On the DPP side, we've got Lai Ching-te, and he's going to be formally anointed, but nobody's challenging him in the primary, so it's all but a done deal. So we know who the Democratic Progressive Party candidate is and the Taiwan People's Party candidate. The giant mystery, and again, I haven't had a chance to get to my news today, but who will be the KMT's candidate? And that's really where all the attention is right now. The front runner in the polls for ages, and he was also has been rated for years the most popular politician in the country, new Taipei Mayor Hou Yu-ih, has just recently started plunging in the polls. I mean, like dramatically. He just lost like 12 points in 2 months, which is a pretty sharp drop. I mean, to be sure, he still has high approval ratings, but they're not stratospheric like they were before. And so he's actually, in my opinion, starting to look a bit weak. The other problem with him is his family. He's from a family that speaks, Haklo Taiwanese, and his family's been in Taiwan for hundreds of years. And there's elements within the party, the elites, the party elites that have a lot of power at the top levels of the party, most of whom are what I call 49er families, they're from families that fled China in 1949. Or deep blues, we also call them. A lot of them have been coming out and making statements like they're afraid that Hou Yu-ih would be a Li Denghui 2.0, by which they mean that he's a secret supporter of Taiwan independence and that sort of thing. They also accuse him of having blue skin and green bones, basically like saying blue, i.e. KMT on the outside, but green, or i.e. DPP on the inside. The reality is nobody actually knows because he almost never comments on national level politics stuff. So we actually have no idea what Hou Yu-ih thinks about relations with China, relations with the United States. He only gives the vaguest answers, if anything at all. So nobody really knows where he stands. And that's part of the reason why I think there's so much suspicion within the KMT. So, but he's, up until just the other day, he was the most popular potential candidate. Another potential candidate would be Eric Zhu, the chair himself. And he pretty obviously wants to run for president because he did previously in the 2016 race. And he's fresh off of a big win in a landslide win in the November local elections. He's much more acceptable to the party elites. And then you have some other oddball characters in the mix. You've got Terry Go, the founder of Foxconn, who actually he ran in the primary in 2015. He lost in a huff. He got furious, attacked the KMT, and left the party. And now he wants to rejoin the KMT and run in the primary. But the party rules say that he's not eligible to rejoin the party until September, which would be after the primary.
Wow.
So, however, the party can change the rules if they want to make an exception for him. They can definitely do that. So everyone's kind of waiting to see whether Eric Zhu will let him back into the party or not. I think that there's going to be a big push to get Taichung Mayor Liu Xiaoyan to be the party's candidate. She doesn't have any of the major problems that Hou Youyi, people don't suspect her. She's from a 49er family. She's from central Taiwan. Women have been doing electorally better than men in recent elections. For example, in the last local election, 2/3 of female candidates won their races versus half of male candidates. Sort of give you an idea. And this has been a trend that's been going on for a while. She's also, her stronghold is central Taiwan, which is generally a bellwether battleground, it's kind of the battleground state area of Taiwan. But recently, Eric Zhu said there's not going to be any primary at all, which is a massive power grab. So the candidate is going to be chosen, presumably by Eric Zhu himself. And there's quite a bit of surprise and shock about this, but they can do that. Normally, though, in past years, you would have public opinion polling to see who was the strongest candidate, or you might have party member votes or a split between both. A common pattern in the past has also been 70% public opinion poll, 30% party member poll. So, but in primaries, how they're chosen in Taiwan is a major strategic choice, unlike, say, for example, the United States. So this is a very interesting move by Zhu. Everyone's on pins and needles waiting to see who he's going to choose. And so because we don't know who the KMT candidate is going to be, and that's going to change the race in all kinds of interesting ways.
And when can we expect a KMT announcement?
Well, again, as of yesterday, there was no announcement on when he would make the announcement.
I see.
So
we're hanging in on tender hooks, as you say.
Yeah.
The other topic that has Taiwan in the news lately has been that Honduras President Xiomara Castro del Zelaya has established official diplomatic relations with the PRC, thus forfeiting formal relations with Taiwan. Can you tell us what happened there?
In her campaign, she ran, and one of her, it was included in her platform that she would shift ties to China. I mean, so we've known this is coming for quite a while. That it took this long was actually more of a surprise. Now, the Taiwan side says that Honduras was demanding a lot of money and debt forgiveness in exchange to keep ties. The Honduras side denies this. But this is something that's fairly common. She ran on a platform. I mean, she's ideologically on the left, and historically, those who are elected, ideologically on the left, for example, Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua, same sort of thing. They tend to be a lot more friendly and have a much more positive view of the Chinese Communist Party than right-wing parties do. So right now, Paraguay has a right-wing government, and they're sticking with Taiwan, but the opposition, the left opposition, has included that they've been talking about switching relations to China. And then there's usually two things that these countries want. They want Belt and Road Initiative investment from China, and they want to open up markets in China for their products, because Taiwan just isn't as big a market, as China is, for obvious reasons. And the Chinese government, has a lot more money than Taiwan's government does. So, but the countries that tend to stick with Taiwan are suspicious of China and their intentions. They've seen a lot of other countries end up deeply in debt to China. They've seen that China frequently breaks its Belt and Road Initiative promises. And also the amount of money that China has been doling out on BRI projects has declined significantly since 2016. So some countries seem to want to stick with Taiwan, and usually there's an ideological element to that because Taiwan is a very friendly, cooperative, helpful democracy, and their diplomacy usually is, helps, farmers use new seedlings in their crops and education initiatives for women joining business and these kinds of things.
Okay, I mean, what is the reaction being like on the street in Taiwan to this announcement? I mean, does this affect public opinion, or is there a big public opinion on this type of change by Honduras?
Not really.
Okay.
I mean, there's a small percentage of the population that will care, but I think it's just this has been going on now since the late '60s, or maybe even earlier. I mean, I could actually say going back since 1949. Countries have been shifting their diplomatic recognition to Beijing continuously ever since, I guess, 1950. I think it was when the Brits and the Russians, I think it would have been late 49, 1950 or so, they shifted diplomatic relations to Beijing. So it's been going on for a long time.
Next question I wanted to ask, though, was regarding President Tsai Ing-wen. President Tsai is planning to meet Speaker of the U.S. House, Kevin McCarthy, on her upcoming stopover in California. Meeting the Speaker in California to reduce the risk of drawing the ire of the CCP. But commentators are saying that the CCP may have planned or somehow engineered this Honduras move to coincide with Tsai's meeting to send a message. Do you think there's any truth in that?
It's possible. I suspect that, they've been talking about this, because again, Castro said she was going to do this at some point. It wouldn't surprise me if the timing ended up being tied to this trip, but I would not be surprised at all if it isn't, if it just, because these kind of things, they go through processes. And I would have thought it would probably be more advantageous to China if they did it much closer to the election. But, I really could go either way on that one. I just don't know.
Okay. Nevertheless, President Tsai will meet the Speaker in California, I guess, to avoid or prevent the previous Nancy Pelosi follow-up that we had back in August. I mean, here in Western Europe, there isn't much news coverage really day to day of the level of grey warfare and other tactics that are being conducted by the CCP against Taiwan. But some of the stories that have made the news here recently have been the cutting of the internet cables to Matsu Island, one of Taiwan's outlying islands, and the CCP involvement being suspected. But there was another one which is a lot more sinister, and it's relating to a Chinese nationalist blogger named Zhou Xiaoping. He recently proposed a resolution at a session of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, this 2 sessions that was going on a few weeks ago. And his proposal was to draw up a list of Taiwanese separatists to be killed during a special military operation to take Taiwan. He also recommended in the same proposal that the state compile and issue sanctions and a punishment list of Taiwanese foundations and companies and capital that provided funds or donated political contributions to the DPP or other Taiwanese separatists. My question again is this type of thing getting much notice in Taiwan, and what do you make of it?
I mean, yeah, obviously this gets, noted, but it's worth noting that China has already announced that they have a list of, what they call, there's a specific phrasing, like die-hard separationists. They had one of these clunky ways of phrasing it. And they've put on the list, a bunch of major politicians. Now, that list doesn't call for them to be killed. It calls for them to be, I believe, arrested, if memory serves. So and sanctioned if they, but I mean, the people who are on the list are just kind of shrug. It's like, not like I'm going to go to China. I'm not that stupid. Um, so, I mean, this guy, this individual, you know, there are people like that in China. As far as I know, they're not actually doing, they're not actually doing what he's suggesting. And keep in mind that, if they were going to invade, they would be doing that anyway. It's this is this is the Chinese Communist Party here. They're a brutal, murderous regime, and if they invaded Taiwan, then yeah, they would be doing exactly that, regardless. But the big thing would be if they decide to launch an invasion. That's a much, much bigger deal than they would have a list of politicians and prominent people to kill. So, I the real big issue is if China is going to attack. The issue is not whether or not they will kill people when they get here. They definitely will. So regardless of what this guy says, if they invaded, they'd do it anyway.
Yeah, I guess a statement like this, and this chap went on to say on Weibo that his resolution had been adopted. I guess a statement like this definitely will draw attention in the West here, where we don't normally see these type of things. But the thing we wonder about is if it's just cranking up the pressure on another way to crank up the pressure on Taiwan as part of the ongoing campaign of the CCP.
Yeah. The fact of the matter is that he wasn't censored. Kind of tells us that the government, at the very least, is kind of like shrugging and going, okay. And possibly they're even actively encouraging him. I don't know, but that he's not being being censored, that by itself sends a message. So, but there's one thing to keep in mind. So for example, when the Pelosi visit happened, and then China killed the Davis Line, which is the center line in the Taiwan Strait, which they'd only ever crossed with their military since the line was created in the 50s. You could count the number of times that they crossed that line on one hand. And then all of a sudden they just flooded the zone, crossing the Davis Line and then conducting massive war games encircling Taiwan in Taiwan's AIDZ. But here's the thing that a lot of people don't realize about this. A lot of people said, oh, Nancy Pelosi visiting Taiwan provoked China to do this, which is totally false. There's no way that China could conduct war games on that scale on just a few days' notice, because it wasn't known when she was coming until only a few days before she came. So they were just waiting for an excuse. They were going to do this regardless. If it hadn't been, hadn't been Nancy Pelosi, they just would have found another one. I mean, they even had lists of thousands of products they were going to ban from importing, ban Taiwanese imports. You can't come up with a list that extensive, again, in just a few days. So, China decides they're going to do these things, and then they find an excuse to do them. So, I think that's something that's kind of important to keep in mind. So a lot of people are like, well, the Speaker of the House, McCarthy, shouldn't go to Taiwan because it'll provoke China. No, if he came to Taiwan, or as it looks like it's going to be now, President Tsai meets with him in California. Either way, if China wants to do something, they will just do it. They might find this a convenience excuse, although it doesn't appear. The military here said they don't see any signs of anything being prepared this time on the Chinese side. But so I don't really worry about these things, because there's really kind of almost no such thing as provoking China. China provokes itself, really, is what's going on there.
That's probably a good note to end on, especially I think for Western politicians and politicians in Ireland who might be listening, because I think it just if there's hesitation in terms of visiting Taiwan, it should tell us that we should just go and do the right thing rather than worrying about what the Chinese think. So
Yeah, and a lot of countries are doing exactly that right now. There's a Czech delegation of, I think it's 150, 160 people, which includes, I believe, the equivalent of their Speaker of the House, is in Taiwan right now, or maybe they just left yesterday or today. I don't remember exactly because I haven't gotten to the news today. But there have been delegations. The Lithuanians have been particularly active in exchanges. There's some of the Eastern European countries have been particularly active. The UK, the United States. These are some of the countries, and Japan. Quite notably, have been sending quite high-level delegations. And there is talk that the newly elected Czech president may come to Taiwan. He actually, when he was president-elect, he spoke on the phone with President Tsai. And he says he would like to visit Taiwan. So that may actually happen. A sitting president of Czechia might actually come visit Taiwan. So yeah, I would say the same with Ireland is, don't worry about it. It is, China it offends itself, really. It's just kind of what it all comes down to.
My thanks to Courtney Donovan Smith for joining us on Perspectives with Nilo. And you can follow Courtney on Twitter at Donovan_Smith. And we've also linked his details on our blog site, as well as some additional links and references for you to dive deeper into today's topic. You can find it all at pwnilo.com. Perspectives with Nilo is also available on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Instagram and Twitter. Well, that's it for the moment. Until the next time, thank you for listening. Slán agus beannacht.